Yeah, no. Some of you may be wondering, well, why don't you see Olympic shooters use a thumb draw? For those who have tried, like I just did, you might find the answer to be obvious. But let's have a deeper discussion as to why modern sport archery has evolved the way it has. Before that though, let's answer the question, are you allowed to use a thumb draw in Olympic style archery? To my knowledge, there is nothing in the recurve division rules, which is a standard World Archery Olympic competition, which says you outright can't use a thumb draw. It does specify the equipment you can and can't use. And among those, it does say that you cannot use a release aid of any sort. To my understanding, the thumb ring, which is often used with thumb draws, technically counts as a release aid, so this wouldn't be allowed in competition. That said, if you're using a glove, then I guess technically you're still allowed to, because the rules for freestyle recurve don't dictate what you can and can't do with your finger placement on the string. Going beyond Olympic archery, if you shoot field archery, there are more divisions. The modern bare bow division will specify what you can't put on your bow, but it doesn't specify what you have to do with your fingers. And this is because many bare bow shooters will use string walking or face walking techniques. For the instinctive division, it does specify what you have to do with your fingers because it doesn't allow string walking. It is meant to be instinctive or gap shooting, which means in that case you can't use a thumb draw because it wouldn't comply to the rule set for instinctive shooting. Apart from that though, again, in freestyle shooting, which is the Olympic recurve, there is nothing which says you can't shoot with a thumb. So why don't people shoot with a thumb? I want to cover this from both a historical point of view and a technical point of view, because historically we have to understand why the Western style of archery, and therefore the Mediterranean draw, is the dominant form in Olympic archery, and why the horse bows and thumb draw is not the norm. What we have to understand is that modern sport archery is completely detached from war archery, and this is not just only in time but also in region. The split between Western archery, which is mostly based on foot archery, and Eastern archery, which is often based on mounted combat, are completely different. The use of the thumb draw developed for one main reason: to keep the arrow on the bow while riding on horseback. The fact that you have the arrow pinched between the thumb and the forefinger means that as you are riding, the arrow is pressed against the bow and it would not fall off. This allows you to keep the bow straight, canted, even upside down, and the arrow would not fall off the bow. And that is hugely advantageous in the styles of warfare used in the East. In Europe, most archery was done on foot, hence the prevalence of the three-finger Mediterranean draw. This is going to be important as the evolution of archery stopped at the end of the Middle Ages. Archery was quickly replaced after the development of gunpowder weapons, and the skill to use archery had long diminished. Archery became less of a military application and more of a sport practiced by the aristocracy. The same shift would happen in the East thanks to the development of firearms and European trade, exposing many Eastern commanders to the superiority of firearms. An example of this is in Japan, where the samurai class were very quick to adopt the musket above the traditional bow and arrow. In fact, more muskets were produced in Japan during that time than in Europe. What this means is that archery was dead, and it stayed dead for hundreds of years in the East and the West. Beside the groups of people who use archery as a survival skill, it was only practiced as a sport by the upper class. It was this gentlemanly pursuit of archery as a sport that would bring about the dominance of the Western style of archery, as people from Europe would colonize and migrate to other parts of the world. We then fast forward to the modern Olympic Games, starting in 1896 and especially in 1900. The sport of archery was already practiced around the world, and archery was one of the first Olympic sports. However, it was soon discovered that archery was far from standardized. Well, people came and shot in the competition. The differing rounds and differing rules meant that archery had to be unified under a single sporting body before it could become a competitive sport. And hence we have the Fédération Internationale Tir à l'Arc, or FITA, the World Archery Federation. This international organization, as with other international bodies like FIFA, would standardize the sport of archery, and it would evolve over many decades to what we see today. Target archery using set rules and set rounds using standardized equipment, hence the prevalence of the Western Mediterranean style of archery. And so Western archery through FITA became the standard of international competition, and because of that, other countries will adopt Western archery for this purpose. This is very similar to sports such as fencing, which is overwhelmingly based on European fencing, and sports like judo and taekwondo, which are Olympic sports, originating in Korea and Japan, but being spread around the world as a standard style. So what happened to Eastern archery? Remember, archery was dead. And while in the West it was still retained as a popular pastime for the wealthy upper class, the same probably couldn't be said for the East, where archery was very much defunct and extinct thanks to gunpowder, and with the number of conflicts that were fought during the last century, archery has struggled to retain its place in society. Of course, we still see pockets of people and cultures retaining their traditional archery. You can see the archers of Bhutan and Mongolia and the Nadam games. But unlike Western archery, these traditional forms of archery lack cohesive organization. We don't have a FITA for traditional archery. And for that reason, it's very hard for traditional archery like this style to make headway in the West. And while we of course do still see forms of competition using traditional bows in the East, these competitions are mostly localized. So Eastern traditional archery has mostly been region locked and lacked an international organization which represents the development of the sport. In contrast, Western archery through FITA and later World Archery has continued to develop the sport and grow it worldwide. So, as much as you might want to see horse bows in Olympic Games, thanks to the development of history, this is the Olympic standard. Even with the equipment that's in place, why don't people shoot a thumb draw anyway? This is the technical reason. Basically, the technique does not match the equipment. With a horse bow, a right-handed shooter will normally place the arrow on the right-hand side, and the grip of the thumb and the forefinger will allow the arrow to be pushed against the bow, hence it will not come off. The Olympic bows are designed to be shot from the left-hand side for a right-handed archer, and when we attempt the thumb draw using the left side knock, what happens is that I will naturally pull the arrow off the bow, and that's because of the pinch between the thumb and the forefinger pushing the arrow off each time. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to keep the arrow on the bow. Now, some cultures will use a thumb draw from the left-hand side. There is a modified grip which basically keeps the arrow between the index finger and the bow, allowing it to stay in place. However, this is far from the norm, and in Olympic archery, this is impossible due to the placement of the hand and grip on the riser. Really, I can't. Even with the clicker, it just comes off as soon as I pull it. Finally, there isn't really an advantage to using a thumb draw. Even if you use a left-handed bow and reverse the grip and put on the right-hand side, a thumb draw is not seen as superior to a Mediterranean draw. While someone using thumb draw traditionally might attain a very good level of accuracy for their purposes, Olympic archery with its long distance shooting and precision requirements mostly benefit those who shoot Mediterranean. There are fewer problems with tuning, there are fewer problems with arrow clearance and the archer's paradox. Generally speaking, modern archery using the Mediterranean draw with the arrow on the left-hand side is more accurate than people shooting thumb draw from the right-hand side. This isn't saying that the thumb draw is terrible and shouldn't be used, but understand that modern equipment and modern competition have led to the development of technique as we see today. And that is why we don't see the thumb draw in the Olympic Games. This is NUSensei. I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.